So this week, what I'm going to do is kind of extend where we started last week with doing Notepad and looking at, building an application essentially. Go a little bit beyond. Let's put some controls on a form. Let's tie some events together. Let's make some stuff happen, and start talking about extending beyond. I have some content on a page. It's doing some basic events, and doing those pieces of saving content to a file, pulling content from a file and bringing it back in. We'll touch just conceptually on what are called streams. That's basically the element or terminology that you would use to push and pull bytes of data from files, from network shares, from just about anything. You use these streams. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then the rest, or the other side of the lecture, will be a little bit more around some of the elements of building a WinForm, putting toolbars in, using the floating or movable toolbar, show you that. We're going to go through and talk about the rich text area so that you can make something that's a little better than a notepad, more like a WordPad or a Microsoft Word. So how does that work? How does that look? And then what was the last piece that I was going to try to cover? It'll come to me. So nothing too earth-shattering, but conceptually there's a lot of nuances and kind of mini elements to these, and what we'll go through that will be of value as we kind of go through them in further development. So to start off, what we're going to do is take our form inside of our toolbox. I'm going to collapse this for a moment. I'm going to jump straight to menus and toolbars. What I'll first do is drop a menu strip on, so we have a menu across the top. And then instead of just grabbing the tool strip, I'm going to actually grab the tool strip container and drop that on the form as well. I get the accelerator that pops up. I'm going to dock this to fill the form, and it then fills out all four corners of the form. What this does for you is this control replicates or provides you with this type of an experience where you can grab toolbars and pull them off, and you can drag them around and reorder them. This control does that. It facilitates that. So this is just the container, but then we can actually grab our tool strips, and we can drop one here. If we wanted to, we could actually drop a second one here next to it, and it'll stack them. You can expand this side out, and if you wanted to, you can grab another tool strip and drop it here. So you actually have tool strips in 3 locations of your form, so you get that more complex feel. In terms of flexibility, this is a much better approach than just tacking a single toolbar up, because if later you want to have multiple toolbars or move them around, or even give the end user the liberty or flexibility to move them around, this control gives you that ability. They still function the same, so if I take focus of one of the toolbars, I get this little multi-choice drop-down option where I can add buttons, labels. I can do a button splitter. Drop downs, the separator, combo box, text box, and progress bar. One thing that you'll notice here is that you also have a bottom option, and you can drop controls and tools in here. This is kind of up to your discretion and personal preference, but you can put a toolbar down here and then treat it as you would a status bar. The status bar will not, it will not clip into the control, but it'll clip below it. So generally you don't want to give the user the ability to kind of move around a status bar, so it's better to use a traditional one and keep it kind of clipped to the bottom. So we'll leave that collapsed and we'll just kind of focus on the top. All right, so the application that we're going to kind of build through this lecture is going to be a WordPad or a Word-esque type application. We want to have that experience, that feel through this application. So I'm just going to call it the KG WordPad. And I'll set up all of my basic menus. So I'll have my file with a new, open, save, exit. And if you recall from last week, you use the ampersand in front of the character you want to use as your quick key. And then we'll do an edit. And inside of here we'll have cut, copy, and paste. And then inside of here we'll do format. And we'll do things like bold, italic, and underline. And then we'll just have an about or a help with a basic about page. Okay. So along those same lines, we'll need a series of buttons. So that'll be new, open, save, and then we'll add a separator, and we'll do undo, redo, separator, cut, copy, and paste. Okay? And I'm actually going to add 2 more in here. I'm going to do my undo and my redo. Now I can just grab these and drag them up as well, so if I need to resort or reorder them. I can also right click and do an insert, and I can insert a separator here so that we get that separation between the undo, redo, and the cut, copy, paste. I'll go through and add a few keyboard shortcuts. So this will be a Control X. Tack that up. Control C.
Did ours have to have all this functionality, like in the format for the homework?
No, you're not expected to have all this functionality for the homework. So, but now that I've done it in a lecture, it will be expected from this point forward. So, in all honesty, I mean, it's a tedious thing the first time around, and it gets very cumbersome to set it all up. But once you do, my goal is that after the midterm, you'll be working on a single project, and you'll be kind of evolving that project up to the final. That's kind of the goal, is after the midterm to do that. Is we'll set you up with a project, you'll work through that project, and it'll basically become a learning lab. You'll work on that project from now to the end of the term, doing one-on-one with me, asking me questions. Maybe we'll do mini lectures talking about things like connecting to SQL databases, some of those other concepts that may apply to everyone. And so you'll have plenty of time to do the nitty-gritty as well as do the more sophisticated. So, I always joke that this is why they hire code monkeys, which are people right out of college, to do this work, so that the good guys don't have to do the nuances.
Is that really what it's like out there, or is that just like a legend?
Oh no, it's really like that. I mean, if you have somebody that's a really good developer, you don't want them wasting their time going through forms. Now, that being said, if you're working for a very small company, or a company that has a very small IT department, you'll be doing the fancy stuff and you'll be doing the nitty-gritty. So, usually once you can show yourself as being able to be competent and do your work, they usually move you off the nitty-gritty stuff pretty fast. So, but until they get a sense of what you can do, it's less expensive. Hate to say it that way, but it's less expensive for them to put you on the nitty-gritty and make sure that your work isn't being wasted or your time isn't being wasted, versus burning your hours on stuff that may be way beyond your capabilities at the time. So, alright, so that's good enough for now. For time, I'm not going to put icons on all these. We'll just kind of assume that it's new, open, save, undo, redo, cut, copy, paste. That's okay with everybody? Alright. Alright, so then the next piece of this that we're going to need is the rich text box. And the rich text box lives underneath your common controls, and it's right here. So we'll drag that in. We're going to drag it into the center space. The center space is also a usable space. And what's nice about that is that you can then fill to what's called the parent container. So for a moment, let me just kind of digress and talk about the way some controls work. Some controls are what I kind of like to think of as independent controls. Sometimes you may hear me call them child controls. They're controls that do not have the capability of housing or holding other controls. So what kind of controls are those? Text box, radio buttons, checkbox, label. They're basic functionality type controls. They serve a specific purpose, and that's what they do. They're very good because they serve a specific purpose. They're not so good because your flexibility is a little limited. Then you have other controls that function as parent controls that are container controls. Those controls are your forms. Your form is a control. It houses other controls. You have a group box control that houses other controls. You drop them in there. It draws a little frame around them, makes it look pretty. This tool strip container functions as a container, a parent control for a lot of things, tool strips, and then anything you can put inside of the center. It doesn't have to be a text box or a rich text box. We could just drag a button in here if we wanted to. We could drag checkbox in here if we wanted to. Anything will go into this space. If you try to drag one of these in there, you'll notice it kicks it back out and brings it back down to the center container. So some of the containers are very specific around what they'll hold. Other containers are a little more generic, and they pretty much will hold anything. Equally nice about the container controls is that you can nest them. So I could go in here and grab a group box and drop it in here. So it will live inside of that control. All right. So, rich text box. What I'm going to do is click on the accelerator, have it dock to the parent so it fills it out all the way. And what this will do for us is when we're running it live, if we resize or maximize the page or the window, it'll resize fully and fill out the whole space. Without doing the docking, it ended up just kind of floating in whatever relative XY coordinate plane that it had originally been dropped in. All right. So let me just run this real quick. Okay. So what I'm doing right now is I'm highlighting and I'm pressing Control B on my keyboard just to try to bold that text. And I'm doing that for the purpose of demonstrating that that bold ability doesn't happen automatically. You actually have to program that to work. So even though this is a rich text box, it has the capability of bolding text, but without actually programming it to do it, it doesn't do anything. Equally, none of these have been programmed with any event, so they're just there for show at this point. Exit doesn't exit. This will close the program, though. So, all right. So let's start with our formats. Those are pretty simple. Actually, I take that back. Before we start with the formats, let's start with the cut, copy, and paste. So let's start with cut. Now, the rich text box by default is called rich text box 1. I'm going to call it RTB1 just because it's shorter to type. If we had more than one, I would usually use what's called Hungarian notation to identify the type of control. So RTB, rich text box, and I could call this main form. So that's the rich text box on the main form. Now, to do a cut, you have to interact with the rich text box. Now to do that, let's just talk about conceptually, process-wise. What do we need to do? We need to capture the text from the text box, store it in the clipboard. Everybody knows what the clipboard is? Okay. And then the piece that I always used to forget was remove the text from the text box. I would always do basically a copy. I would highlight the text, I would take the text out of the text box, copy it to the clipboard, and I would always forget to delete it from the actual text box, so I always ended up with the copy of it still there. Alright, so the first piece is that we want to capture is that text. So RTB main form 1. Now with a traditional text box, we have a text property. In this case, we still have a text property. The text property will capture all the text in the box. It's not just going to capture what's selected, it's going to capture everything. So that cut will not cut what's highlighted, it'll cut everything out of the box. There is also a selected text property which will return to you only the text that's selected. So that's kind of a nice bonus, is that you can use that to capture what is selected versus capturing everything out of the box. So I'm going to do string text to cut. All right. And then there is a static class called clipboard that contains a series of static methods. And it's a series of get and sets. So you have things like you can store to the clipboard an audio stream, you can store just generic data, a data object, file drop list, image, and text. So you have a lot of different options about what you can store here. In this case, we're going to store text. So we'll do a set text to the clipboard. And then this has two overloads, so you can store the text itself, or you can do the text and the data, the text data format. So the first thing is this is the text to cut. And then text data format's an enumerator. So we'll do dot. Let me get that out of the way. And you'll notice in here that it actually has unique text data types. So what you would see traditionally in like a regular notepad application is you would be storing text. You can also have Unicode text, which is a wider set of bytes that's used. It's a traditionally, I think Unicode is 16 bits, so regular ASCII values from 0 to 255, 8 bits, and then they doubled that to 16 bits, so you can get things like characters that have like umlauts and tildes and stuff across the top, so that Unicode character set matches that. So if you're writing an application that you know will be used internationally, it's important to keep in mind that you probably want to use a Unicode data type or a Unicode text type when you're storing values. Otherwise, if you use the traditional text type, you'll probably end up dropping a lot of characters. So, comma-separated values, that's kind of a neat one. If you think about when you're in Excel, you can copy a series of rows or a series of cells from Excel and paste them into a text document, and it'll come out as a tab delimited or a comma delimited when you paste it into the text document. That's because those values are actually being stored in the clipboard that way. So the system is kind of smart enough to have this logical presence of, oh, that's data in there, maybe I should treat it this particular way. And Windows kind of helps you do that. HTML, if you're writing a rich text editor for HTML, this is smart enough for where you highlight the rich text, you copy it. Say if you're using something like Expressions or Dreamweaver, you can actually go into the the design mode, copy and highlight that text, and then you can turn around in Notepad and paste it, and it should, if it's functioning correctly, paste the HTML markup that generated that text. So this helps you determine those types of functionality. So it's also a nice bonus if you're in Notepad, you write up a whole bunch of HTML, you go into Dreamweaver and you do a paste. If Dreamweaver's smart enough and the text is marked as HTML, then when you paste it into Dreamweaver, it won't paste a whole bunch of HTML into the designer. It'll actually render out as whatever it should be. So nice bonus here and there as well. All right, so then the last option is rich text. Rich text is pretty much what you see in any sort of word processor. So the ability to underline, italicize, bold, strike through, different fonts, all of that functionality is kind of under this umbrella of rich text. So if you have a a text box that does rich text, you want to make sure when you save that text out that you're marking it as rich text. Okay? All right, so we take that text to cut, we store it on the clipboard as rich text, and then the last step is for us to update the control and remove that text that was selected and cut. So to do that, we'll say, and there's actually two ways to do this. You can do, let's see, where is it? There's selection length, and there's a selection start, so you could do some string manipulation of start at the beginning of the string, find where the selection starts, go to the end of the selection, and then take what was at the end of the selection and then continue on extracting. That's a little more complicated. Something that's ironically simple is that you can basically say that, and it will take the selected text value that's in the text box and replace it with an empty string. So that was something I came across later after my first lecture where we did the string work the first time. Something I am noticing now that I always forget is that there actually is a selected RTF or rich text format. So we'll want to actually capture the RTF version of the text, and then equally we'll want to replace it with an empty string. So, all right, so I'll put a breakpoint here just so we can kind of examine everything, and we'll run. So I'll say, hello, this is Kevin. I'll do a cut. So what has happened is that it captures that text as rich text. All of these slash values and hex values are the RTF, so it's the descriptive information that's around that text. If we click on this previewer, you'll actually see in here that you have ANSI settings, certain flags in here around character sets. There's the font, and then finally you get to the point where you actually see the text. So it's all kind of jammed up in there, but this all represents the word Kevin that we highlighted. Okay. So if we go ahead and play on, you'll see that it removed Kevin. I can then jump into WordPad, or Word even, and paste, and then there's Kevin. Okay. So I went through and showed you that so you could understand the mechanics of it. There is a stupidly simple alternative to this. The control has a series of methods that help you. So you can do RTB, main form, dot, and then you can just call the cut method. And that will do the exact same thing that those 3 lines of code did for you, without having to write all the code. I show you that for another reason. And I think I've said this before. There are very smart people that get paid a lot of money that work in very large teams to build the framework. I'm not saying that you guys aren't smart and don't know what you're doing, but don't bother reinventing code if you don't have to. If there's a method that can do the work for you, back to the idea of the guy who has to put the cut, copy, and paste shortcuts on the links. If there's somebody there that's already done it, don't waste your time reinventing. Just go forward and do the more sophisticated work. So, cut, copy, and paste all pre-exist, all pre-built into the rich text box. I believe the undo and redo is also built in. Yeah. So in terms of wiring up all of these events, it's simply a matter of creating the event handlers, and then going through and actually just filling them in. So this is copy. Paste. Redo. Undo. Now you may think, oh, there's got to be an italics event to make things italic, and there isn't. RTB underline, and there isn't one for those either. Okay. So, how do we make those happen? Huh?
Font?
Have you already been down this road? You already played this game?
No, but I've spent hours this week
From playing with it? Alright. Fair enough. So, if you do RTB main form dot font, and probably more specifically if we're wanting to change a selection, we'll do the selection font. You'll notice that it is a font class. So it takes and gives a font class. This font class has bold, font family, which is the actual font itself. You can identify the GDI character set. You can identify the height, line height. There's your italics. Size and points. Strikeout. Underline the unit that the font is measured in. So you have all these different options. So if we want to set this to bold, we'll say true. Because it takes a bool. And then you run into this problem. That property bold is read-only. You can't set it to bold. Okay? I'd like for you guys to take 5 minutes and see if you can figure out how to do this. Okay? So let's take a few minutes. Kick the tires. Quarterback on. Alright, so you're saying we do rich text box dot selection font equals new font, right?
Right. Or to put an arrow up.
Okay. Why is it not new font? Alright. Anybody else have anything?
You use the bold or the italics or whatever in a conditional to see if it is or is not bolded.
Okay.
Change it to bold, but changing it to bold is what is I don't even know.
Okay. Alright, so we need to determine if it's bold so we know if we need to make it bold or not. Alright, so we'll do if RTB main form selection font is bold, right? And then we'll do X, else we'll do Y, which will probably be some derivative of this again. Okay? I'm good with that. Anybody else? Alright, do we want to start by examining what needs to be passed to font? So let's look at the signature. So the first thing it takes in is a font name. Hang on a second.
Wait.
Yep.
Is it B font, comma, font style dot bold?
B font.
Comma, in the font string. Or like, never mind. I lied. Read it.
Ooh, what am I doing? There we go. Alright. So let's back out and do it this way then. I think you're kind of you're on the right track. So let's back this out. And we'll call this change font, okay? So I'm going to go up here and declare font, new font. Okay, simple enough. And then new font will equal I think I'm getting myself confused. Hold on. F6. Okay. Look at my cheat sheet, which was the code I already made. Alright, for whatever reason we're not getting the accelerator, but what should be coming up here is, or not the accelerator, the IntelliSense. What we're looking for is the font constructor that takes in a font as a, that's the top one here actually. Okay. So what we're looking for is this constructor for a new font. This constructor takes in two elements, two parameters. One is a font and the second one is a font style. The font is a prototype. It basically is predefining for us what this new font should be, minus whatever new styles we append to it. Alright, so in theory what we should be doing here is we're creating a new font, and we're saying this new font is RTB main form selected font. So we want to take whatever font styles that currently exist and we want to capture those because we don't want to lose anything. We want to capture what's already there. Then we want to add new font styles, and in this case, if the text is not bold, we want to make it bold. And then if the text is bold, we want to make it regular. New font, right? Make sense? So we create a new font that is bold or it's not bold, and then we apply it. All right. Now I'll preface this and tell you that it doesn't work right. I'm just going to make that statement now. To show it, I'm going to actually copy this and come down to italics and make some bold modifications so that we can italicize our fonts as well. I'm going to hit F5. So I'll say this is Kevin. I'll highlight Kevin. I'll go format, bold. It's not working, so let's come back in here. Oh, logic. Yep. I'll make the same change down here. Okay. So highlight it, Control B, which brought us into the code at the breakpoint. So it says it's not bold, and it should then apply the bold. Okay, good deal. So we'll highlight Kevin again, we'll do format, we'll say make it italic. I don't feel like it went. Format italic. It's false. Huh? Oh, I didn't. You're right. Thank you. bold, italic. So I can either make it bold or italic, but not bold and italic. Okay. So to make that happen, we have to use what's called a bitwise operator. Did you guys learn about bitwise operators? Okay. Every time, they always shake their head no. You know what a bitwise operator is? Mr. C++? Alright, other Mr. C++?
Do bitwise functions, but we hardly ever work with them.
Oh, boo. Okay.
Plus is so basic, you don't have to.
Alright. So I don't have to make up this nonsense. You're welcome to go to Wikipedia and look it up. But long and short of it is that you're dealing with values at the binary level. And you're basically doing binary math. So the idea is that you have the series of 4 functions that you can use. You have a not, an and, an or, and an XOR. Ironically, what they do and what they're called is not logical or very, just making sense. It's not very clear. So let me start off with an example. You would think an and would combine 2 values, right? Because it's this and this. What an and does when it functions as a bitwise operator is that you have this value of 5 as a decimal. So that's the binary equivalent of the number 5. And then you have the binary equivalent of the number 3. If you say 5 and 3, the answer is 1. What it's doing is it's looking at each one of these byte positions and it's saying, respond back with where the first position is 1 and the first position and the other number is 1. So that's true, 1. If this position is 1, true, and this position is 1, then this is 1. So it's not doing math like you would think. It's actually comparing them byte position at a time, determining if they're equal. So here's another slightly smaller example. If you do bitwise AND operation on the number 3 and the number 2, you get back the number 2. Okay? Kind of quirky. Nots are pretty straightforward in terms of what they do. They take all of the off bits and turn them on, and all the on bits and turn them off. So all your zeros become ones and your ones become zeros. Okay? The one that we're most interested in is this ability to combine values, because we want to be able to be bold and italic. So what we actually want to use is a bitwise OR operator. And what bitwise OR does is it will return you a result where it's true or 1 or on in either one of the positions. So if you look at this particular example, let me zoom in a little bit. 5 is 0, 1, 0, 1. 3 is 0, 0, 1, 1. And when you bitwise OR 5 and 3, you get 0, 1, 1, 1, which is 7. So let's go through a basic example. If this is bold, if this number represents bold and this number represents italic, this number uniquely represents bold and italic. Okay? So here's another little beautiful piece about enumerators that's kind of a hidden gem. If you define an enumerator, and I'm going to pull up the actual definition for this enumerator, as having a flag attribute, that flag attribute then means that there are numeric values associated with this enumerator. And those numbers traditionally are your 1, 2, 4, 8, all of your binary uniques. associated to each one of those bitwise values. Or, I'm sorry, each one of those enumerators. And because it's marked as a flag attribute, you can perform bitwise operations on this enumerator. Okay? So let that conceptually sink in, and I'm going to show you an example of what that means. So just for clarification, I'm going to add another type here. I'm going to call it bold and italic. I don't know if it's going to let me do that. Nope, took away my little ampersand. Oh, there you go. And it. 2 ands makes an and symbol. That's a new one for me, so there you go. Alright, so we're going to create a new event that does bold and italic. So we'll copy this chunk of code, paste it in, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, I'll just say if it's not italic, run this. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say take the current font style, copy it as the prototype, and then take font style dot bold, and then what's an OR in C#? What's an OR in Java?
The 2 lines.
Thank you.
Only hit this for
Yeah, pipes. 2 pipes. All right.
It's called thing about the slash.
What's an and in C#?
And.
Okay. Just making sure we're all on the same page still. All right. To do bitwise operations, you know this is why you have 2 of them instead of 1 of them. A bitwise operation is a single pipe. Or bitwise operation, single and bitwise and. Okay? So we'll bitwise or bold and italics together. Which here's bold, here's italics, and then if we choose bold and italics, we get neither. Then we get bold and italics. Okay? So that works great as long as we're fine-tuning and setting those. If we're not setting, if we don't know what the previous value is, how do we incorporate this new value into it, right? That's kind of the trick. So we don't need that. So let's jump back up to bold. What we need to do is we need to bitwise or combine whatever existing font styles are currently applied to this text, adding bold to it. So to capture what style's already there, we're going to go RTB, selected font. And remember I mentioned briefly that there's a style property here? That style property is of type font style. It stores that enumerator. So that enumerator that we pass in here gets stored in this property. And then those booleans of bold, italic, underline, all it does is it interprets what this enumerator is and says true or false. So if we say font selection style, bitwise or font style dot bold, it'll take whatever's there and add bold. Cool? Oh, yeah, my event is gone. So if we say Kevin, we highlight it. We'll do italics first. Then we'll do bold. Cool? Now if we do bold again, it's going to strip everything away. So then the question is, how do we remove bold? We still use a bitwise operator to accomplish it, but we use a different one. Oh, I'm sorry. RTB main style. So what do you think we use to take it away? He mumbled and. Anybody else? Thumbs up and. Everybody like to and? All right, we'll go with and. Italic, bold, bold. Still bold.
What if you switch them? Doesn't matter which one comes first.
Let's try it. Italic, bold, bold. Italic, bold, bold. Yeah. Not and. Good try. That was my gut instinct as well. If we go back and look at the bitwise operator, what and does is it tries to find where there's two ones, where there's ones in all the positions. In that case, what happens is that italic and bold share the same one somewhere. So it's like italic is 1 and bold is 2. So in the 1 position, they're both 1. In the 2 position, they're not both 1, so it only returns the 1 position's 1. If you followed that. Okay. What we actually want it to do is we want it to subtract or separate. So the fourth operator is an XOR, where it does the inverse of the OR. So wherever there is not 2, wherever a 1 doesn't exist in both places, you get a 1. But if it does exist in both places, you get a 0. Conceivably subtracting that value out. So it's actually very similar to what we did on the last one, but we used the XOR operator. The XOR operator is the little caret. It's that keyboard short character that you never use unless you're writing an exponent equation. You're always like, what's that for? That's what that's for. Alright, so if we run, say Kevin, italics, bold, not bold, bold, not bold. And to indirectly answer your question, it doesn't matter what order they're in. Okay? So that's how we handle the styles. Now, do you guys interested in seeing a cool little shortcut that only requires like 2 lines of code to make this work? Okay. Alright, so we go rich text box, main form, selection font equals new font. So we'll still prototype that font. And then what we'll do here is we'll take this font style I'm thinking through the logic and I'm thinking I might be wrong. What I want to do is do an OR, and then I want to do a logical statement of, let me simplify this. This is going to look too grossly complicated. Font SEL font equals RTB main form selection font. Okay. So we'll call font new font, and we'll say new font equals SEL font, currently selected font, and then we'll say SEL font style. And then what we can do here is say SEL font bold. Is it bold? That's a Boolean. And then you can do an inline logic statement by using a question mark. Fancy? Huh?
You're making this up now.
Oh, whatever. Making this up now. So if it's bold, Then what I want to pass in is style, or is font style bold, and I'm going to put an exclamation mark here because I want it to oh, come on. I want it to do a not, but it's obviously not that. Alright, let me flop my logic around. So if it's not bold, return bold. Else, I'm pretty sure it's not bold. So go C#, bitwise not. Tilde. So what that should do in theory is take what we've already established, and it's just using the bitwise math. So if you do an OR, what you're looking for is, I'm going to take what's there, I'm going to add to it whatever isn't there. Well, if we do a OR and we take the inverse, to take what's there and essentially subtract what should be there. I'm winging it, I'll warn you, so it may not work. That's what programming's all about. You try something and either it works or it doesn't, right? Alright, so there's italic, there's bold, there's strike through. Not what I wanted. Alright. Alright. I could let you sit there for 20 minutes and watch me try to go through this, but I'm not going to do that. So, what I wanted you to get out of that was that you can have inline logic statements. That was the real purpose of that demonstration. Okay. So, this same thing can be applied to all these other ones when it comes to fonts. So we'll say RTB, main form, selection font, style, or XOR, font style, italic. Now, places where you're probably going to run into this bitwise convention that you may want to take note of is that if you kind of work in that hybrid networking software space where you're working with networking type elements, but you're writing software, when you're working with permissions. So if you think to, you pull up a file, go properties, security. So you always have your user, and that user has this set of predefined permissions. Well, if you notice, they're each mutually exclusive, but can be combined together. And some of them are dependent on the other. So you can't have modify without having read and write. Each one of these permissions is actually associated at the core level, so even below the .NET level at the actual C level, they are treated as bitwise values. So if you say, go get me the permissions for this file using the framework, it will turn around and give you an 8-bit number as a binary number. You can then add and remove permissions by using those bitwise operators. So if you need to give someone access to a file, apply permissions to a file, you do that using the bitwise operators. Removing them, the same thing. One other convention of bitwise that is kind of fun is that because AND will essentially spit back out to you whether or not those ones exist, you can take a value, and I'll come back up to the bold, and instead of using this Boolean, you could come in here and say RTB main form font selection font style and font style bold equals font style bold. You're all like, what? There we go. Okay. So let's walk through this slowly. Because this is kind of, it's actually very important. It's not so much important for C#, but just having an understanding of these concepts. Alright, so let's say bold is 0001, right? That's bold. Okay. So if our current font, let me just give each one of these values. 0010, italics. 0100, underline. Right? Makes sense? Okay. So if we have a font that is a 0111, it is bold, italic, and underline. If it's a 0110, it's not bold, it's italic and underline. If it's 0101, it's bold and underline. Okay? So if we have 0111 and we do an AND 0001, what the computer will do is it will go position at a time looking for the spot where the 1 exists in both places. So 0. It's not a 1 in both places, so it's a 0. Not a 1, 0. Last one is a 1. So logically, what I'm saying here is take whatever the font style is right now and bold to it. And if you return bold back, it has bold. Yep. So, in this case, we want to make sure that if it doesn't have bold, we apply it, and if it does, we let it go. Cool? So that little line here, and I don't know this for a fact, but I'm pretty certain that when you say font style.bold and it says true or false, it's basically doing this calculation and returning you whether or not it's true or false. So again, you can use this same concept back with the permissions. If you're checking to see, does this person have write permissions to this file? You say, give me that person's permissions to the file and write equal write. Well, if they have the ability to write, then yes. If you're ever writing your own application where you need to set up your own security model, where you're managing your own permissions for an application, this is a basic convention that works well. Now, the shortcomings of this are the more permissions you have, the more bytes that you need. And ideally, the more unique bytes you need. So your number becomes longer and longer as you add more permissions. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay? Alright, do we want to take 5 minutes?